In our last video, we were starting with creating our assets in Illustrator and then creating multiple artboards for each keyframe of our typographic animation. And you can see here I've actually done all that work already. It's a fairly straightforward, simple graphic layout. And you can see that every item, if I open up the layers panel, every item has had every item that is going to be moving individually is going to be put on its own layer. So for example, the I'm of this second keyframe is on its own layer. Is on its own layer. Dude, I select that, again on its own layer. This arm is on its own layer. Anything that is going to be moving individually or changing in some way has to be on its own layer, and I highly recommend that you name your layers before you import this into After Effects. After Effects will be able to import all of these separate layers with their names, but it would be very difficult to go in after you've imported all your stuff and name it then. Let's zoom in just a little bit on this keyframe here. The graphic of the guy sitting in the chair and the circle behind him. In my storyboard, I had these moving together. They weren't going to be moving individually, so I've grouped them together, and they can all be put onto one layer, which I've called Chair Dude. And the weather vane as well. That is just one graphic, because that'll all be moving together. And everything else, for example, the scroll here, I think that should probably come down a little bit. That is on its own layer as well, called Scroll 1. Now, I'm not being really particular about layout here, because this will all have to be laid out again in After Effects. What I'm doing here is I'm just trying to get an idea of how my assets are going to relate to each other when I actually, in a rough way, when I actually get this into After Effects. But what I really want to pay attention to is once I've created all these assets, that all the layers have been separated, and all the graphics have been separated onto separate layers, and all those layers now have names. Now, as you can see, we have a lot of layers here, and there are layers that, for example, here, Dude 2 only relates to this third keyframe. This goes from order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this graphic here only relates to this third keyframe. So we have to do something before we can just take all these graphics and put them into Illustrator or into After Effects. And what we're going to do is we're going to save each one of these artboards as a separate Illustrator file. And now the way we do that is we go to the File drop-down menu, select Save As, and I'm going to create a new folder here. I'm going to create a new folder, and I'll call these Dude Keyframes, and I'm going to call it 2 because I already have one that's called Dude Keyframes. And I'm going to click Create, and I'm going to click Save. Now, a dialog box is going to come up here, and this is where we really need to pay attention, because we have a click box or a checkbox here: save each artboard to a separate file. That's exactly what we want, and we're going to select all. If we wanted to, just select a range if we wanted to, and type the numbers that the number of the artboards that we want. But we're going to select all, and everything else is going to be just fine. We're going to say OK. And it'll take a couple of seconds, and that will save our artboards into separate Illustrator files. Let's open up one of those files and just take a look at what's there. And I'm going to go to Dude Keyframes 2, and here you can see each one of those artboards has been saved as its own Illustrator file. And we've got 0, 1 to 5, and let's just open up Dude Keyframe 1. And look what's happened here. It's only saved the layers that pertain to that artboard. The graphics that were over top of the third artboard are not a part of this Illustrator file, and that's very important, because when we import the keyframes into After Effects, we don't want to have too much duplication, and we don't want to have a lot of files that aren't pertaining to this particular Illustrator file in those layer stacks. And you'll see the benefit of that in just a moment. Now, one thing I have noticed in the past is that After Effects sometimes will, when you try to import these Illustrator files into After Effects, they will remember all the other layers that were a part of this original keyframes file. And so we sometimes have to do a little something, well, it's a little workaround. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to select one of these items. I'm going to move it slightly. That allows me to go Command S to save this file, and then I'm going to go Command Z to put it back to where it was. Now, why does it do that? Well, this is sort of a way of making sure that only these layers are associated with this Illustrator file, and After Effects won't be confused into thinking that there are more layers of part of this file. Now, I know it's a little bit of a workaround, but it's something we kind of have to do. So I'm going to do that quickly with all of these. I'm going to go Command, save that. I'm going to close that. I'm going to open up the next one, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to take one of these items, move it slightly, save it, and then go Command Z, and then close it up. Save again. I'm going to do that for each of these 5 files. Now, once I've done that, once I've made sure that I've opened up each of these files in Illustrator and resaved them, I know it's, like I say, it's a bit of a pain, but it'll make it worthwhile in the end when we save these and bring these into After Effects. Well, we are done with Illustrator. We have created all the graphics that we needed. Now, last thing before we leave Illustrator, I want to make sure that you realize that Illustrator, After Effects will be linking to this file when we import all these graphics into After Effects, meaning that if we make any changes, if we go back to this Illustrator file and we delete a layer or rename a layer, that will show up in After Effects, and that can cause us a whole bunch of problems down the line, especially if we've already started animating and then we suddenly make a change in Illustrator and we go back and everything that we've done relating to that graphic has been lost. So make sure that this whatever you do here in this file or in any of these Illustrator files that we've saved as single artboards, if you're going to make any changes, make sure that you change a version of that file, not the file that you've actually linked to. This will become a bit clearer when we actually get into After Effects. Let's do that right now. As a matter of fact, I'm going to open up After Effects right now. And here we have After Effects as with no compositions, and there's just nothing here at all. It's a blank project. And this is where we're going to start importing our Illustrator file. So let's do that. Let's go to the File drop-down menu. And I'm going to select the import option, and I could import each one of those Illustrator files one at a time, but we do have the option of importing multiple files at one time. So let's do that. I'm going to select multiple files, and in this case I'm going to double click on the dude keyframes here. These are the ones I had created earlier, and I'm going to select the very first AI file, dude01, and I'm going to go down here. This is very important. Import as, now the first option is footage. Now footage refers to film or anything that doesn't have layers attached to it, but we want all the layers that we have created in our Illustrator file to be maintained. So I'm going to click on this and I'm going to select Composition, Retain Layer Sizes. Now retain layer sizes means that any object that is on a layer, that layer will just be the size of whatever object is on it rather than the incomplete size of the composition. And you'll see what I mean in just a moment. So I'm going to click Composition, Retain Layer Sizes, and I'm going to select Open, and it'll take a little second. Now because we have multiple files, importing multiple files, this import screen will come back up, and I'm going to do the same thing for all these other Illustrator files. Composition, retain layer sizes, and there we go. Okay, now that I've got those all in, I can just hit cancel. Now you can see over here in our project panel, this is called our project panel here on the left, you can see that we now have a composition for each one of these Illustrator files. There's also a folder associated with each one of those compositions. If we just twirl down one of the disclosure triangles for one of those compositions, you can see each of the layers, the Illustrator layers, is there in that folder. Now, What we're going to be using is not the folder, however, but the composition. Let's do something. Let's double click the Dude 01 composition. And there is our Illustrator file with all the layers that were associated with just that artboard, not all the other layers. And let's see, let's do that with all these others as well. So you can see that, in fact, all our Illustrator files have been brought over into After Effects with the layers associated with those artboards retained. Well, we are just about ready to start animating, but we will do that in the next video.